Welcome. This is Cheating Facts. Tell me where you're watching from. Today's story is called They Told Me I Wasn't Family Enough to Get My Share. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family, even after years of proving your worth? Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who hurt us deepest. What's the most hurtful thing a family member has ever said to you? Tell me in the comments below. I always knew I was adopted, but it never mattered to me. Until the day it became a weapon they'd use to destroy everything. I thought I knew about family. My name is Devin, and this is the story of how I spent 15 years building an empire with the people I called family, only to discover that blood apparently runs thicker than dedication, loyalty, or love. I was 3 when Harold and Margaret Whitmore adopted me. They already had 2 biological children, Brendan, who was 5, and Natalie, who was 7. From day one, they treated me like their own son. Never once did I feel like the outsider. The charity case, the kid they took in out of pity. Harold would ruffle my hair and call me his boy, and Margaret would pack my lunch with the same care she showed my siblings. The Whitmores owned a small construction company when I was growing up. Nothing fancy, just Harold, 2 employees, and a beat-up truck that broke down more often than it ran. But Harold had dreams. Big dreams about growing the business, about leaving something substantial for his children. I fell in love with that business before I could even hold a hammer properly. While other kids were playing video games, I was at job sites with Harold, learning the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. By the time I was 12, I could read blueprints. By 15, I was running small crews during summer break. Brendan and Natalie, they had other interests. Brendan was all about sports and social status. He'd rather spend Friday nights at parties than learning about profit margins and project timelines. Natalie was academically gifted, already talking about college and a career in medicine. The family business was never their passion. It was mine. When I graduated high school, Harold made me an offer that changed everything. Instead of going to college immediately, he wanted me to join the business full-time as a junior partner. Not just an employee, a partner. He'd help pay for business classes at the community college, and I'd slowly earn equity in the company as I proved myself. You've got the hunger for this, Devin, he told me that night over dinner. Brendan and Natalie, they'll find their own paths. But you understand what we're building here. Margaret squeezed my shoulder and smiled. You're going to take this company places we never dreamed of. And I did. God help me, I did exactly that. The next 15 years were a whirlwind of 18-hour days, calculated risks, and gradual expansion. I revolutionized our operations, brought us into the digital age. With project management software and online marketing, I developed relationships with suppliers that cut our material costs by 30%. I hired the right people, trained them properly, and created systems that turned Harold's small operation into a regional powerhouse. By the time I was 33, Whitmore Construction had grown from 3 employees to over 40. We were handling million-dollar commercial projects, had a fleet of 20 vehicles, and owned a 15,000 square foot facility that housed our offices and equipment storage. Harold, now in his 70s, had stepped back from day-to-day operations. He trusted me to run everything while he enjoyed semi-retirement with Margaret. Brendan had become a successful insurance broker in another state. Natalie was a pediatric surgeon in California. They visited for holidays, sent birthday cards, but the business was my domain, my life's work. I thought I was building my legacy. Turns out, I was just making it easier for them to cut me out. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. Margaret's voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. Harold had suffered a massive heart attack during his morning walk. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was gone. The funeral was beautiful. Harold would have loved seeing how many lives he'd touched. Employees, clients, competitors who respected him. I gave the eulogy, talking about the man who taught me that integrity wasn't just good business practice. It was the foundation of a meaningful life. During the reception, Margaret pulled me aside. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but she managed a weak smile. Harold was so proud of you, Devin. You know that, right? The business. Everything you built together. He wanted you to know that you were the son. He always dreamed of having carry on his legacy. I held her as she cried, promising that I'd take care of everything. The business, the employees, her financial security. I'd handle it all, just like Harold would have wanted. The reading of the will took place 3 weeks later in the law offices of Peterson, Hayes and Associates. It was a small gathering, Just Margaret, Brendan, Natalie, myself, and Harold's longtime attorney, Mr. Peterson. I expected some formalities, maybe some personal items distributed among us. But I knew the business would continue as it had been. Harold and I had discussed succession planning multiple times over the years. I was already the operational head of the company, and he'd always talked about making it official when the time came. Peterson opened the folder and began reading the standard legal language. Then he got to the meat of the document, and my world started crumbling. To my beloved wife, Margaret, I leave our family home and all personal belongings, along with a trust fund of $500,000 to ensure her comfortable retirement. That made sense. Margaret deserved security and comfort. To my daughter, Natalie, I leave a sum of $300,000 to support her continued medical career and her young family. Generous, but not surprising. Natalie had student loans and 2 small children. To my son, Brendan, I leave a sum of $300,000 in my collection of vintage tools, which he always admired. Still tracking. Brendan had always loved Harold's antique hand tools, even if he'd never learned to use them properly. And finally, to the matter of Whitmore Construction. This was it. This was where Harold would officially transfer ownership to me, maybe with some provision for Margaret's ongoing financial benefit. I leave the entirety of Whitmore Construction, including all assets, real estate, equipment, and accounts, to be divided equally between my children Brendan Whitmore and Natalie Whitmore. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt dizzy, like the air had been sucked out of the room. But Peterson wasn't finished. Devin Richardson, who has served the company admirably as an employee, is to receive a severance payment of $50,000 and a letter of recommendation to aid in his future endeavors. The silence in that room was deafening. I stared at Peterson, waiting for him to say there was more, that this was some kind of mistake. But he simply closed the folder and looked around the room with professional detachment. Are there any questions about the terms of the will? I found my voice somehow. There has to be some error. Harold and we discussed the business succession many times. I've been running the company for years. I built this company. Peterson's expression remained neutral. The will is quite clear. Mr. Richardson, it was updated and signed just 6 months ago, with proper witnesses present. 6 months ago. Harold had updated his will 6 months ago and never said a word to me. I looked at Margaret, desperate for some explanation, some sign that she was as shocked as I was. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. Margaret, my voice cracked. You knew about this? She finally looked at me, and what I saw in her face destroyed whatever hope I had left. Not surprise, not confusion, guilt. Devin, honey, Harold struggled with this decision for a long time. But in the end, Brendan and Natalie are his biological children. It's their birthright. Brendan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing. Natalie at least had the decency to look conflicted. But I built this company. I repeated, hearing how pathetic I sounded. 15 years of my life. I sacrificed everything for this business. That's when Margaret said the words that will haunt me forever. And we're grateful for everything you've done. But Devin, you have to understand, you're not really family. Not in the way that matters for something like this. The room started spinning. 15 years of my boy and son. And you're going to take this company places we never dreamed of. Evaporated in that single sentence. Brendan finally spoke up. Look, Devin, we know this is hard. But we've talked it over, and we're willing to offer you a management position. You can stay on and run things, just like before. Nothing really has to change. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud, which seemed to make everyone uncomfortable. Nothing has to change? You just inherited a company worth over $2 million that I spent 15 years building. And you want me to stay on as your employee? The salary would be very competitive, Natalie added quietly. And there might be profit-sharing opportunities down the road. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky but functional. I need some time to think about this. Of course, Peterson said. But I should mention that the transition of ownership is effective immediately. Any business decisions will need to be approved by the new owners going forward. I walked out of that office in a daze. 15 years of my life, reduced to a $50,000 parting gift, and a job application to work for the people who'd just stolen my future. But here's the thing about betrayal. Sometimes it opens your eyes to truths you never wanted to see. I spent the next 3 days holed up in my apartment, alternating between rage and despair. Then I started thinking clearly for the first time in weeks. Harold was a meticulous businessman. He documented everything. If he'd really intended to cut me out, there would be a paper trail of that decision. I went back to the office early, before anyone else arrived, and started going through Harold's files. What I found changed everything. Hidden in a folder marked Personal Insurance Documents were drafts of Harold's will, for different versions, dating back over 2 years. In the first 3 drafts, I was listed as the primary beneficiary of the business, with provisions for Margaret's care and modest inheritances for Brendan and Natalie. The final draft, the one that had been executed, was dated 6 months ago, just like Peterson had said. But there was something else in that folder, something that made my blood run cold. A letter from Brendan to Harold, dated 8 months ago. The letterhead was from Brendan's insurance company, but the content was personal. Dad, I hope you'll reconsider the business succession plan we discussed. I know Devin has worked hard, but at the end of the day, he's not really a Whitmore. Natalie and I have been talking, and we think it would be unfair to our future children if the family business went to someone outside the bloodline. We're not asking you to be cruel to Devin. He can stay on as a manager, but the ownership should stay in the family. The next document was a response from Harold, but it wasn't addressed to Brendan. It was addressed to me, a letter he'd apparently never sent. My dear Devin, it began. I've received pressure from Brendan and Natalie about the business succession, and I'm struggling with what to do. You are the son of my heart, if not my blood. You've earned this company in every way that matters. But Brendan has made some valid points about family legacy, and Natalie supports him. Margaret is torn. She loves you, but she also worries about creating permanent divisions in our family. I don't know what the right answer is anymore. All I know is that whatever I decide, I'm going to lose a son. The final document in the folder was a handwritten note, dated just 2 weeks before Harold's death. His handwriting was shakier than usual, probably due to the heart problems that would soon claim his life. I can't live with this decision. Devin deserves better than what I've done. I need to change the will back. I need to make this right. He died before he could fix his mistake, before he could undo the damage that pressure from his biological children had caused. I sat there in Harold's office, surrounded by 15 years of shared memories, and realized that I'd been grieving the wrong loss. I hadn't just lost a father figure. I'd lost my faith in the idea that love and loyalty could overcome biology and birthright. But I also realized something else. Harold's letter proved that he knew the truth. I had earned this company. His biological children had manipulated a sick, elderly man into betraying his own conscience. The next morning, I called Peterson and scheduled a meeting. Not to contest the will. That would be expensive, lengthy, and ultimately futile. But to negotiate my departure on terms that reflected the reality of the situation. I want to buy my equity position, I told him. Harold and I discussed my ownership percentage multiple times over the years. I have documentation of my contributions to the company's growth. I want Brendan and Natalie to buy out my interest at fair market value. Peterson looked skeptical. The will doesn't recognize any equity position for you, Mr. Richardson. I slid a folder across his desk. Then they'll need to explain to a judge why 15 years of business records show me listed as a partner in planning documents, tax filings, and loan applications. They'll need to explain why I was signing contracts and making financial decisions. If I was just an employee, it took 3 months of negotiations, but eventually, Brendan and Natalie agreed to a settlement. They bought out what we calculated as my 40% interest in the company for $1.2 million. Not quite what I deserved, but enough to start over. I used that money to start my own construction company. Within 2 years, I'd lured away most of Whitmore's best employees and half their client base. Turns out, people in the construction industry valued competence over bloodlines. Margaret called me once, about a year after Harold's death. The conversation was awkward, full of long silences and careful words. I hear your new company is doing well, she said. It is. Harold would be proud. I let that hang in the air for a long moment. Would he, Margaret? Because the Harold I knew wouldn't have cut out a son who spent 15 years building something beautiful. The Harold I knew wouldn't have let his biological children manipulate him into betraying his own values. She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. I found the letters, she finally whispered. In his office. The drafts of the will, Brendan's letter, all of it. And I understand now why you left. Why you had to leave. Do Brendan and Natalie understand? Another long pause. They're struggling to keep the business afloat. Brendan doesn't have your instincts. And Natalie's too busy with her medical practice to be involved day to day. They've asked me to reach out to you to see if you'd consider coming back. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. As an employee of the people who told me, I wasn't family enough to inherit what I built. Devin, please. Harold made a mistake. We all made a mistake. Yes, you did. But the mistake wasn't changing the will, Margaret. The mistake was thinking that family is about blood instead of love, loyalty, and sacrifice. The mistake was believing that biology matters more than the choice to show up every day and build something beautiful together. I ended that call and never looked back. 5 years later, my company has over 60 employees and annual revenues exceeding $5 million. I married a wonderful woman named Elena, who understands that family is something you build, not something you're born into. We're expecting our first child next month. Brendan and Natalie sold what remained of Whitmore Construction 3 years ago. The buyer was a national chain that kept the contracts, but laid off most of the employees. Harold's legacy, the legacy I thought I was building, is now just a line item in someone else's corporate portfolio. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Harold had lived long enough to change his will back. If he'd found the courage to tell his biological children that love and dedication matter more than DNA. But then I realized that maybe things worked out exactly as they should have. Maybe I needed to learn that the family worth having is the one that chooses you every day, not just when it's convenient or profitable. They told me I wasn't family enough to get my share. Turns out, they weren't family enough to keep it. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us.